World News Today, brought to you by the Admiral Corporation, makers of Admiral Radio, America's smart set. By shortwave broadcast direct from important overseas stations, as well as leading news centers of our own country, CBS correspondents are waiting to bring you a complete report from the world's political and battlefronts. But first, here's Doug Edwards.
The Germans say that American bombers striking from bases in Italy have attacked the Southern Reich again today. So far, there's no word from our own headquarters. Last night, the Royal Air Force hit Frankfurt and other targets with great force. Berlin reports that the Russians have now crossed the Dniester River at Yampol, and the Russians announced the capture of Kremenets, 70 miles northeast of Lvov in Old Poland. On the Italian front, the battle for Cassino appears to be nearing an end with our troops in control of most of the town. But now for further details of the Italian campaign, Admiral Radio takes you to CBS Algiers, Winston Burdett reporting.
Practically the entire ruin that is Cassino is in our hands today. Our troops yesterday mopped up German pockets in the rubble of the blasted town, laboriously wiped out snipers and machine gun nests, and pushed on to Cassino's western rim, where the enemy was still desperately clinging to two last strong points, each one composed of the wreckage of a half-dozen houses. In the hills to the west, Indian troops hammered out further short gains, closing the ring around Cassino to 3/4 of a circle. The Indians have edged forward toward the monastery ruins on Abbey Hill, where they now hold two humps of ground on the middle slopes. It looks as though the final assault on the Abbey itself is near. This is still a battle of yard-by-yard annihilation. The Germans are still fighting with everything they have. The Luftwaffe yesterday stepped up its attacks in the Cassino sector, sending over wave after wave of bomb-carrying Fokker Wolves. Each wave totaled between 15 and 30 aircraft. Most of the bomb-carrying planes had strong fighter escort. In 3 dogfights, American-flown Spitfires bagged 7 of the attacking planes. Here in Algiers, the French are still waiting for some sign from Washington as to what the American decision will be with regard to France's political future. The question is again very much to the fore, because the French here have heard various disquieting stories of White House proposals for the administration of France after the Allied landing. One proposal from Washington, which has apparently been put before the British but has not reached the French, would place the administration of France in the hands of Allied military authorities, allowing them to pick such local Vichy officials as they choose to work with until a sufficiently large section of France has been freed to bring the de Gaulle committee in. Yesterday, the question was very bluntly referred to by General de Gaulle himself. In a speech before the French Provisional Assembly here, he spoke of the possibility of the Vichy government trying to hang on after the Allies land in France. I say with force, de Gaulle declared, that there can be no other authority in France save that which proceeds from the responsible central power, that is, the French Liberation Committee. Every effort to maintain Vichy in power, he went on, would be intolerable and condemned in advance. And that is where the question still rests, exactly where it has rested for the past 3 months. Frenchmen in the committee and assembly here feel that the Allied governments underestimate the strength of popular feeling against Vichy, underestimate the fabulous confusion that would ensue if they were to try to prop up Vichy's authority. And Frenchmen also feel that the Allies cannot honorably postpone their decision much longer. I return you now to CBS in New York.
More news in just a moment, but first here's Warren Sweeney with a word from Admiral Radio.
The scientists, engineers, and manufacturers of America's radio industry have worked in complete cooperation behind the tremendous research and production programs involved in the war effort. The part of Admiral Corporation is to build electronic and communications equipment for the armed forces. The progress made in laboratory developments, new ideas, and improvements has been amazing, but production has kept pace, and ever-increasing quantities of vital equipment is going to our fighting men. However, such things as climatic conditions, service and replacements, ease of mobility, and many other factors often make communications equipment obsolete in a relatively short time. For this reason, laboratory research has been speeded up to a point where years of peacetime progress are now compressed into a matter of weeks or months. It is not unusual at Admiral for new models to be on the planning boards before previous models have come off the production lines. Obviously, this wartime research will be reflected in Admiral's peacetime products. There will be more Admiral firsts, new Admiral ideas to make your post-war Admiral radio worthy of its famous name, America's Smart Set. Now, here once again is Doug Edwards.
And now for news from London and an interview with two soldiers, one from New Jersey, the other from Michigan, who captured a parachuted German flyer in Britain. Admiral Radio takes you to CBS London. Charles Collingwood reporting.
In these little raids the Luftwaffe has been making on Britain, a good many German planes have been shot down. A certain number of these German flyers have been able to parachute safely to Earth. These German aviators meet with a varied reception. One night last week, one of them achieved the distinction of being the first German to be captured in the European theater by American soldiers. This German was seized by Private Joe Levy and Kat Bogacki of an American armored unit, and they are both here in the studio today. Now, as I get the story, Private Levy, you were on sentry duty. Is that right?
That's right, Mr. Collingswood. Bogacki was coming to relieve me. About 15 minutes late.
Hey, now, I don't think you ought to say that. It puts the Army in a bad light. Well, anyway, you both saw this German.
Yes, we seen this guy coming out of the woods in the dark.
What did he look like, Bogacki?
Well, he was sort of a figure. Wouldn't you say, Levy? Yeah, he was sort of a figure. When he got closer, we could see his headphones hanging from his head. I raised my rifle and said, halt. Then he said, comrade, comrade. Then he hollered, German. Me German from Germany. Put his hands up and turned around, did sort of a dance to show he was surrendering.
Oh, did you search him? What did he have on him?
Well, he pointed to his side and said, pistola, pistola, or something like that, and we took his gun away from him. He had a knife on him, too, a sort of jackknife principle, a blade, 6 or 7 inches long.
Good night. Did you talk to him? Did he speak English or anything?
Yes, he spoke pretty good English. His sentences sounded okay. I asked him what happened to him. I said, did Boom Boom get your plane? I don't know how to speak German. He wouldn't say whether the Yak-Yak shot him down. He just said his motor caught on fire.
Well, what else did you ask him?
We asked him whether Berlin had been bombed good.
You did? What did he say?
He threw up his hands and said, Berlin kaput, all gone.
Did you ask him whether he'd ever been in Russia?
Yeah, I asked him about that. He grinned and said, Russia? Oh, no. It looked kind of funny when he talked about Russia. Somebody asked him what he thought about the war, and he shrugged his shoulders and said, war's all over, all finished.
Well, it's too bad more of them don't feel that way. They ought to communicate with each other. Well, what sort of a fellow was this German, Levy? What was his rank?
He was a corporal. I guess he was a radio operator on the plane. Anyway, he said, telegraph.
Well, maybe he was just looking for a Western Union office, huh? How old was he?
He was a little fellow. I thought he was about 18, but he said he was 22.
Well, he doesn't sound very formidable or very tough to me.
Oh, he wasn't. He'd been wandering around for 5 hours, he said, trying to find somebody to surrender to. It's lucky we caught him before he got to the orderly room and surrendered then. That would have made us look bad. We probably would still have been doing guard duty.
We probably still would have been, and that would have been too bad because then we wouldn't have been able to have you up here. Anyway, congratulations to you, Private Levy and Private Bogacki, for capturing that German, and thanks a lot for coming up here with us. This is Charles Collingwood in London, returning you to CBS in New York.
For the news here at home, Admiral Radio takes you now to CBS Washington. Don Pryor reporting.
Washington is waiting for decisions on 2 major issues today. One is the soldier vote bill, which has been on President Roosevelt's desk all week. Whether he lets it become law or vetoes it depends on the answers he gets from the governors of several key states yet to be heard from. So far, it still isn't clear, apparently, whether the new law would increase the number of servicemen who could vote in the election next fall. The other issue is manpower. President Roosevelt has said he would have a statement on that subject early this week. The chances are that he will demand the induction of the vast majority of young men under 26, with the exception of those who are absolutely essential to war production, and they will have to be really essential. Marvin Jones, the War Food Administrator, issued a report today on America's food prospects. He says we will have plenty of food to meet our essential military and civilian requirements, but that this country can't be expected to carry the load of post-war relief feeding in Europe and Asia. America, he said, definitely is not the food basket of the world. Secretary Hull and Leo T. Crowley, the Foreign Economic Administrator, have been discussing revisions in the Master Lend-Lease Agreement with Great Britain. Today, they assured skeptics that all the best interests of American industry and trade will be safeguarded. I return you now to Admiral Radio in New York.
Out in the Pacific, our planes continue their heavy attacks on Japanese bases. For a summary of recent developments in that war zone, Admiral Radio takes you, after a few seconds' pause, to CBS Pearl Harbor. Webley Edwards reporting.
There's got to be a great deal of plowing, sowing, and cultivating between harvests. In warfare, particularly the kind we have out here, there's always a great deal of getting ready before the next harvest can be reaped. At the moment, there is not much spectacular stuff about the action in the Central Pacific, but there's been a considerable amount of sleeves rolled up, spit on the hands kind of work. It's a very essential part of the advance toward the China coast and Japan. This week, while the submarine force maintains its everlasting destruction of Jap supply lines, the air forces of Admiral Nimitz' command have had a similarly non-spectacular but equally important part in the gradual grinding up of Jap facilities. Theirs has been the drudgery of day-by-day bombing of Jap bases all over this expansive and very watery portion of the globe. To many of us here, the cumulative result of these scores of attacks on Jap islands in the Carolines, the Marshalls, and the Kuriles, so casually reported in the run-of-the-mill headquarters releases, make a large and important story. Not many weeks ago, an attack on Truk would have called for a rush to spread the startling news. This week, Fleet Air Wing 2 sent planes ranging within easy distance of Truk, attacking Oraluk, 190 miles from Truk, while liberators of the 7th AAF attacked Truk itself without any losses. Kusai and Ponape in the eastern Carolines, not very long ago well beyond our reach, are now being bombed regularly by both Army and Navy land-based planes. The bombing of the bypassed and isolated eastern Marshall Islands, still held by battered Jap garrisons, has become backyard, milk-run stuff. Fleet Air Wing 4 has continued its bombings of the Kuriles, hitting several times at Paramushiro and Shimushu, and on St. Patrick's Day, Army liberators of the 11th AAF joined them, at the same time sending a liberator down within 500 miles of Japan proper to bomb Matsuwa Island. The effect of these bombings is steady destruction of Jap bases. The Jap High Command can never know when one of these strikes will develop into a major attack or invasion. We've reported these day-by-day attacks to you with no fanfare. We rather take them for granted. We almost forget that these missions are extremely difficult flights over long distances to tiny pinpoint targets and back to pinpoint bases, calling for the most precise navigation and for the conquest of freak weather conditions. The men of the Central and North Pacific are watching with eager interest the development of action in the Admiralty Islands, in New Britain and New Ireland. And as they watch, they are at the many chores to be done all over the place, and they are very busy with the getting ready, plowing and cultivating for the next big harvest. This is Webley Edwards at Pearl Harbor, returning you to Admiral Radio in New York.
Marshal Stalin announced a few minutes ago from Moscow that the Red Army has captured Kremenets, 37 miles north of embattled Tarnopol and 70 miles northeast of Lvov in Poland. And the German radio reports that advanced Russian scouting units have crossed the Dniester River into Bessarabia. The German High Command broadcast communique claims that Russian attempts to force the Buk River, apparently at Sibino, have been beaten off. The Nazis acknowledge that Soviet reconnaissance forces already are on the west bank of the Dniester. Now Admiral Radio takes you to CBS Madrid. Glenn Stadler reporting.
3.5 million German troops are waiting behind the invasion coast for the Allied attack, a Spanish writer discloses today. He estimates General Eisenhower's forces at 500,000 more. Between Andai and Narvik, there are 1.5 million Germans, 500,000 along the Mediterranean in southern France. Another 1 million are held in reserve at strategic centers, ready to be rushed to danger points. Auxiliary services account for 500,000 more. Most of the frontline troops are veterans of one or more campaigns. Of the 300,000 soldiers in Norway, 60,000 have just arrived from the Russian front, presumably from Finland. The Germans describe their Atlantic wall as a gigantic system of defenses and depths, with not 1 foot of coast out of crossfire range of 12,000 big guns. 10 million cubic meters of cement have been poured into the wall, and construction continues, although invasion is expected hourly. The Nazis claim they've overcome French mistakes about immobile fortifications and deny again they've acquired Maginot-Linitis. Minefields are said to stretch far back from the sea and can't be detected. The Spanish commentator believes the opposing forces are well met, except for one vital factor, air power. He says the Luftwaffe won't be able to match plane for plane, even though Goering has shifted considerable strength from Russia, because Allied production is just too great. He seems to consider a successful landing a foregone conclusion, although it offers the prospect of the most terrible battle in history. Here in Madrid, the bullfight season opened today. 6 bulls met death in the red sands of the ring this sunny afternoon. Later in the season, the Brooklyn Matador, Sidney Franklin, is scheduled to make his comeback. This is Glenn Sadler in Madrid, returning you to Admiral Radio in New York.
For news from inside Germany by an American correspondent who this week returned to this country on the Gripsholm, here is Bill Slocum, Jr.
Mel Most, a darkish, intense young Associated Press reporter, has returned home after 6 years in Europe, the last year and a month of it in a German internment camp at Baden-Baden. A trained observer, Most has returned with a couple of unique theories about the Germany of today and tomorrow. Mel, what is the day and night bombing doing to civilian morale in Germany?
I don't think they cause the havoc we think, particularly the night bombings. I've seen the people a day after the terrific nighttime pastings in nearby Karlsruhe and Buell, and they seemed quite undisturbed. Day raids are something else again. At Baden-Baden, the Americans had a great time watching Germans turn absolutely white when they would see stately processions of American bombers enter and leave Germany at will in broad daylight. That did something to the famous German superiority complex.
Is that complex still in operation?
Yes. So much so, in fact, that I was reminded all the time of pre-war France. The Germans do have a perfect Maginot Line mentality about the Atlantic Wall, in spite of what they say. And like the French, the jury is convinced to a man that his army is the best in the world.
Don't the Germans know about that Russian front?
Sure, but they just can't believe it. More of that Maginot mentality. It is incomprehensible to the average German that the inferior Russian, as he puts it, can beat a German. It sounds strange, but the German mind is a strange thing.
How is Hitler doing these days?
All right. He's still head man to the Germans, and when things go wrong, they're not inclined to blame it on Hitler, but on his satellites. Incidentally, the famous German discipline is slowly coming apart at the seams. There is a growing disrespect for all authority throughout the country.
How did the Germans treat you?
Pretty well. They all had a cousin in Milwaukee and were a little surprised when you didn't know him. And, of course, when I was first arrested in France, they were inclined to be pretty arrogant and strict. But as our bombing pace picked up, you began to feel that maybe the Yanks were dropping copies of How to Win Friends and Influence People instead of blockbusters. The Germans are quite polite nowadays and become more friendly after every defeat on the Russian front.
We hear a lot here about the German shortages.
Well, the German army is the greatest place to eat in Europe. It's the world's best free-of-charge black market. However, the civilian has to do with a diet consisting mainly of potatoes. All he needs, but nothing else. And all the shops are a very grim joke to Germans. All the windows, the display windows, are filled with very inviting items, but none is for sale. The racks inside the shop are bare. There are still some very fine articles unsold in Germany, but the shopkeepers are keeping them well hidden as an investment for the future because they have no confidence in the mark. But one thing more, Germany is the only country in Europe where the people are not starving.
Mel, what do you think the Germans hope for when this war is over?
They are hoping for a compromised peace, of course. But if not, they are hoping, A, that some sort of arrangement will permit the southern Germans to get free of what they consider Prussian domination, and B, that if there is fighting on German soil, the Yanks beat the Russians to Berlin.
Thanks, Mel Most of the Associated Press. Now back to Doug Edwards.
For an interview with a Coast Guard combat officer who's seen action in the Pacific, Admiral Radio again takes you to Washington. Don Pryor reporting.
When the Marines were landed on Namur and Kwajalein Atoll by the Navy and Coast Guard on February 1st, 2 Coast Guardsmen went ashore in the first wave. One of these, Sandor Klein, 32-year-old specialist first class, a combat artist, has just arrived in Washington after being flown back from that area. Each Marine in the operation was a miniature arsenal, while Klein and his companion had only sidearms and sketch pads and pencils and a camera. A year ago, Sandy Klein knew nothing about war. He was a top-flight artist who had studied in Rome and Paris, won the Pulitzer Prize, and had his work exhibited in the best galleries. His job now is to put his impressions of the Pacific War on canvas for the Coast Guard. But now he's going to tell us a little bit about the way war looks to an artist.
Just a little bit, I'm afraid. It might be a good thing to tell it all, but it's an awfully grisly business. The ship I was on went inside the Kwajalein Lagoon on D-Day. John Bickel, a photographer, and I went over the side early in the afternoon with a group of Marines. The next morning, Bickel and I transferred to an amphibious tank. The outfit we were with had received orders to remain on the island. This tank was in the first wave to hit the beach at Namur.
Well, that must have been reassuring. How did it turn out?
All right, fortunately, but we were lucky. There was a big Jap blockhouse on fire about 200 yards dead ahead of us when we hit the beach. It was filled with ammunition, bombs, torpedoes, and all kinds of explosives. All that stuff was exploding. And just as we hit the beach, there was a terrible blast that lifted the tank clear out of the water several feet and crashed it down with a jarring thud. There were about 15 of us inside, and we landed all in a heap. By some miracle, none of us was hurt.
Well, then what did you do?
We got out of there as fast as we could. The tank was loaded with boxes of grenades. We tossed them out on the beach first and then scrambled for the nearest cover.
Was there much opposition there from the Japs, Sandy?
It was pretty hot for a while, but the naval bombardment had killed most of them. The island looked like a rubbish heap. There was hardly a tree left standing. The worst thing was the heat and the smell. The smell of the body saturated everything so you could hardly breathe. Even after we went back out to the ship, the smell was still in our clothes.
Well, if you can call a thing like that thrilling, what was the greatest thrill you got out there?
Seeing my young brother. He was with the 24th Marines in the landing on Roy. I found him the second day after we landed, and he was all right.
Incidentally, that's only one brother Sandy has in the service. He has another in the Army, one in the Navy, another who's about to join the Navy. Besides, one of his two sisters, has a son in the Navy. I return you now to Admiral Radio in New York.
There's not a word of official news from Helsinki or Moscow today on the status of peace negotiations between the two countries, but Columbia's shortwave listening station heard the British radio relay a Finnish radio report which said, "The Russian terms are altogether too harsh to be accepted. We have now indicated our standpoint. The next step will be taken by Russia. Peace cannot be. Two parties are needed to make peace. Everything now depends on Russia and what she intends to do." From New Delhi, Admiral Mountbatten reports that the Japs are mounting a major offensive in Burma on the Chinwin front. They've already crossed the river in force at several points. Meanwhile, the strong British Indian force, which was landed 150 miles behind the enemy lines in northern Burma, has driven the enemy from a strongly held position. And now, once again, here is Warren Sweeney with a word from Admiral Radio.
Wartime demands for better radio equipment have produced many ideas that will be incorporated in Admiral's post-war radios. But there are also some tried-and-true features that will be musts in your peacetime Admiral. The Admiral Aeroscope is one of these musts. Built right into the radio cabinet, the antenna eliminates the fuss and bother of outside aerials and messy, unsightly ground wires. Admiral built and Admiral engineered, the Aeroscope tends to reduce static and assures properly amplified sound waves with full power and volume. Today, all the productive facilities of Admiral's great plants are busily engaged in building communications equipment for victory. Tomorrow, when the war is won, this same energy will be applied to building a better Admiral radio for your home. You'll want your post-war set to be an Admiral, built by the world's largest manufacturer of radio phonographs with automatic record changers. The appearance of personnel of the armed services on this program does not necessarily constitute an endorsement of our product. America faces a drastic shortage of waste paper. Your government appeals to you to save every type and kind of paper and send it off to war. The American home is the greatest source of waste paper, and your country appeals to you to help supply the paper needed in the manufacture of so many vital war supplies. World News Today is brought to you each Sunday at this hour by the Admiral Corporation, makers of Admiral Radio, America's smart set. Be sure to listen again next Sunday when Admiral brings you World News Today by shortwave, direct from leading news centers of the world. Warren Sweeney speaking. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
The WBBM Air Theater, Wrigley Building, Chicago.